Welcome to the Security Operations section of the Cloud Adoption Framework Secure Methodology. My name is Mark Simos, Lead Cybersecurity Architect at Microsoft. John?
Hi, my name is John Dellinger. I'm a Chief Security Advisor at Microsoft, and I work in our Cyber Defense Operations Center.
So, as we take a look at your security operations security discipline, and this is a very unique and special and important part of security, and it oftentimes is one of the first things that we see stood up outside of meeting regulatory compliance requirements, because when an incident happens, security operations, whether it's one person doing it as a job to be done or it's a full-on department, somebody has to actually investigate what happened. Is the attacker still have access? What did they do, etc. And so that's really the core essence of security operations, is that dealing with that realized risk. The attacker has actually gotten access and gotten control of the environment. And so as we think about how to do this right, we've learned a lot of lessons along the way, and we're going to be drawing heavily from Microsoft's experience in this space because we have really good high fidelity information there, but we've also blended a lot of lessons learned and best practices from across the industry and across our customers. And the first thing that we want to talk about here are the key cultural elements and the key measurements, because these are really collectively the North Star for security operations. When you look at the specific hardcore measurements there at the bottom, you're looking for really responsiveness and what that, responsiveness and effectiveness, because you want to make sure that ultimately you're limiting the amount of time that a hostile force, an attacker, has access to your environment. That is the whole point of why you do security operations, and that is we measure that through mean time to remediate. And that's really when the point at which the attacker loses access to the environment is really kind of that ultimate goal of what you're trying to achieve. Now, doing that, you have to, there's a lot of complexity to that, of course, because you're talking oftentimes about real live human attacker operators that are trying to keep that access while you're trying to kick them out. And then the second metric there is the mean time to acknowledge. And so this is more of like an internal indicator of health. In fact, mean time to remediate also is. So keep in mind, we don't want you to measure this and then think that you failed or that people should be punished or discouraged or not rewarded because their mean time to remediate was long, because ultimately security operations isn't in control of the attackers. They're dealing with whatever comes in. 1 month, all the attackers might be doing research and prep and not getting you. And then the next month, you may say 3, 4, 5, 8 different attackers in the same period of time. And so it's very important to recognize that these are indicators of health rather than sort of an absolute good or bad, and you have to keep it under this, this day limit. John, anything to add there?
I totally agree with that. In fact, I think that when it comes to people and KPIs, measurements in our own CDOC, we don't really talk a lot about these for your average analyst on the watch floor. I mean, we certainly brief our CISO on it. We talk about it from an organizational health point of view, but really what we want our people to focus on is, like how long it takes them to respond to an alert. In other words, when they open that alert in their alert queue, we want them to do something meaningful with it, whether it's escalated or resolve it within about 15 minutes. And we'll worry about the metrics on the back end about, organizational health and how the system is working in a general term. We certainly don't punish people not punish, maybe even a strong word, but we certainly don't hold people accountable for MTTA or MTTR otherwise.
Yeah, and as I've said actually in a couple of team meetings, it is discussed, like on your weekly checkpoint, how are we doing? Are we trending up, trending down? This is one of our older ones. Is this one ready to close yet? Because the case closure, which is roughly where that MTTR is, sometimes you actually have gotten the attacker out, but you have to do some cleanup tasks and some other things, like they're no longer in control of the environment. So this tends to be more of like a flag or an indicator in that workflow. So they're aware of it, but it's not like one of those, oh my gosh, we have to take care of it. It just helps them think and prioritize about which ones to focus on for the open incidents.
Right.
And then, oh, go ahead, John.
Oh, you're right about it being somewhat out of our control. I mean, if you have mean time to remediate, we're not going to call something remediated and close it until we've heard back from a product group, for example, that they've actually implemented a remediation. So that's on them to do that. So you were definitely tracking.
Yeah, in the case of the vulnerabilities, absolutely, yeah.
Right.
In the case of an attacker, their loss of access is remediation. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
And so there's some nuances there. Now there's an old expression, and I think Sean and I used it in one of the other videos, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's so important to make sure the culture of the security operations, or SOC, for those that actually have a full center and call it that, is healthy. It is because this is a team that really operates on somebody else's environment, right? So you have the IT operations, which is a bunch of applications that are either managed and run by IT or by DevOps teams, and sort of a hybrid of it. And so they're an overlay onto that organization. There's different specialties. It's highly complex, and no one has all the answers. And so it's really important to make sure that you have a healthy culture that's focused on the mission. Everybody feels aligned to that mission. They're connected to it. They feel like they're part of a team, and they're continuously learning, because there is no way that any one person could understand an enterprise environment. Even the person that built it, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, there's been so many decisions, so many elements to it. You're effectively operating in almost an organic world, like in the real world or the jungle or something like that. And you just have to be constantly learning, and you have to be constantly working with other folks and making sure that they feel comfortable. Hey, I saw this, I don't understand it. Like, they've got to feel comfortable saying that. And then the other person's like, oh yeah, let me tell you what I've learned, because I don't know, right? And then it allows everyone to bring their best self to it. And this is, it's like firefighting, right? If your teammate doesn't have your back, you're not going to be fighting the fire as effectively as you can. So, John, anything to add there?
No, that's good. Like what you said there.
Cool. Yeah, and by the way, we've also found that the skills that it takes to be a successful firefighter in security operations are not necessarily the same skills of like a fire inspector, sort of an auditor, or kind of someone that monitors the configuration, which is also different than sort of the person that builds the building and sort of IT operations. They require a lot of the same knowledge sets for your security operations analysts, and they have to know the technology enough to be able to work on it. But there's definitely a mission-oriented mindset we found in the security operations.
True. I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, John, why don't you kind of walk us through a little bit of like the touch points between security operations and the business, because this has some very specific touch points.
Yeah, sure. I think it's important that your security operations be intimately connected with the business. And of course, that requires a dialogue between the two. And we achieve that in a few different ways. Internally, I think this is sort of our philosophy here that I think is worth sharing. And that is, clearly, we want to know what the business priorities are. It informs our teams of critical assets and so on. It allows us to prioritize when we have, incidents. So getting that communicated to us is really important. So we put a lot of effort in engaging the business units from a security perspective to include us there. And we also need to be able to brief them on, obviously, what's going on, either internally or even sort of in the real world out there when it comes to incidents or vulnerabilities or whatever that might impact our business. And to that end, we have a threat intelligence platform at Microsoft. We have a team, I should say, that's doing tactical level threat intelligence, so supporting incident responders and providing them actionable information on threat actors and their tactics, techniques, and procedures, and that sort of thing. But the other role this team plays is that strategic level reporting to the CISO and to the leadership team to give them a concise strategic understanding of what these incidents mean to our company, even like the public ones, right? Like, how it might impact us, how it might impact our people. If you think for a minute that, everybody at Microsoft is probably using a phone as a device. They've got that device with them at all times. That phone, regardless of its manufacturer, if we detect an incident out there where that phone is vulnerable or there's an active attack against that particular platform, we want our people to know about it because they're connected to our network with those phones and they're using them. So that's the kind of stuff that we're going to feed back up to the business. Of course, we're exercising these, muscles, whether it's that incident response muscle at the tactical level or at the strategic level on a regular basis as well. And I think that's really important because you're going to, at the end of the day, you're going to fight the same way that you train, right? So we want people to train in a way that we expect them to fight. So we do numerous things with our SOC and our red teams. They're constantly active. They're constantly testing the boundaries and giving us plenty of operations to discover and to remediate and respond to. But we also have a more organized approach, highly curated approach. We have an annual war game where we do this. And I think that's an important thing that an enterprise should try to do, is test their processes, their tools, their tradecraft. It's highly curated because whilst you want to keep it realistic on one hand, you also want it to be, you want to give the red team achievable goals. You want to have goals that the blue team can detect and do some remediation on. So we do curate it. We tried, yes. Go ahead.
And the thing, the way that I like to think about those sort of practice exercises, right, kind of going to the blue team ones as well as the executive ones, is you don't want to figure out that you have a broken process and you don't know who to talk to during an incident. You want to do that in a nice, safe environment when everybody's fully there, fully focused, as opposed to a crisis where half your people are out and half of them are distracted by all sorts of other issues and incidents going on.
That's right. And to that end, we bring into these war games, we bring in people from around the company who would not normally even work in our SOC. We get them onboarded and give them an understanding and a feeling for what these incidents look like. Because one day we're going to have to reach out to them maybe for some help, right? Yep. And we want them to know. And then we do the same thing at the executive level. So we have a regular tabletop exercise for execs. We run them through their response to an incident. And actually, that's really useful. I mean, we try to do it as close as we can physically to the CDOC so they get a taste for the work we're doing there and we get exposure. But regardless of where it physically takes place, it's just a great opportunity to practice that muscle there and in most cases confront them with scenarios they hadn't thought about at all.
And we have 3 different touch points here noted, right, which we're going to hit in just a moment. But you might have gathered from this that this is really a relationship. It's a two-way relationship where, hey, this is what we're seeing for attacks. Let's run you through the exercises. Let's give you some notification. Make sure you understand it. And at the same time, why don't you tell us what's important to the business? Did they get near to something that we really care about? Or you might think, hey, are we protecting this? Oh, we have unpatented trade secrets. Let's make sure that we're putting sensors all around that so we can see if they get close. And so it's very much the context of a relationship in a two-way learning and exchange, because they don't teach you cybersecurity in business school. And they don't really teach a lot of business to cybersecurity people. So you kind of have to figure this out on the job.
Totally.
But just kind of doing the bullet point list, just so everybody can kind of anchor on it, those practice exercise tabletops, super critical. Learning what's important to the business so that we have the right sensors, the right response processes. If something's going after one of your high value assets, your crown jewels, you don't want to be waiting till it's number 1 in the incident queue of 15. You want to bring that to the top and start working that right away. So very important to inform the teams on that. And then, of course, when a real incident hits, you want to make sure that senior leadership and others in the organization and PR and communications know what's going on, and then they can judge, okay, what of these do we have enough confidence in that we're going to tell our customers about it? They need to be informed of it so they can make those really good decisions. So you got to have that healthy dialogue. Yeah. Any last thoughts, John, before we move on?
That's good. Yeah, good summary.
Cool. So the last piece here is kind of the tiers and tools. I'll take the high volume stuff, and then John, do you want to jump in after that?
Sure, sounds great.
So when we look at the way, the types of incidents that come in and kind of how the different functions in the organization, and think of this, and if you see the people section of the cyber reference architecture and also some other parts of the CAF, we talk about sort of jobs to be done, because ultimately at the end of the day, depending on the size of your organization, you're going to have a different number of people that you have to divide up what jobs to be done are. And so these are teams in our case, in the case of Microsoft, and in many larger organizations. but sometimes, one person does multiple different functions in a smaller organization if there's only one person in security operations. And so kind of keep that in mind, that these are really how to do it as a job function, more so than, you have to have a person for it. And so the first thing is you've got a lot of high volume incidents, right? There's a lot of attacks that are coming on a high volume basis. And we'll talk about the high complexity ones in just a moment, but the high volume ones, you're just going to get, there's background noise. They tend to be fairly predictable. The tools have kind of tuned to those. The attackers just keep trying the same thing and looking for someone that, is missing a piece of hygiene or missing a patch or something easy. Highly automated attacks, usually not an operator sitting at the end of it. Sometimes there is, and you have to escalate it up. But, you do have to deal with a high volume of security incidents that can damage the company, kind of a death of a thousand cuts, as it were. And this is a place, and automation isn't technically a function, but it is a very important aspect that is used throughout, but it's very, very important for that tier one, because it's easy for these analysts that are going through these fairly repetitive ones and making that little bit of a human judgment call. It's easy for them to get burned out. You don't want them to have to do a bunch of manual work and then a judgment call. You want them to look at what the automation did. Okay, see why it didn't pick it. I'm going to go ahead and approve that fix, right? And so that's really what where the triage team comes in. We tend to not. We recognize that the industry uses tiers or levels within security operations, but we tend to actually use the names of the function because it's a little bit more respectful. Because even though they're early in career, et cetera, that doesn't mean they're a lesser person. Because some people just love that job and they want to keep doing that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and you can see as we move up these tier structures, we've got some different nomenclature we're using. Another reason we do that is also because these different tiers are not necessarily not necessarily a hierarchical or linear relationship. I mean, we'll get alerts that pop out of automation and go straight into the investigation queue, or we'll launch an incident right away based on some threat intel or whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to go through this process. But for us, tier 2 is what we call investigations, and these, in our case, it's the subject matter experts from the different products and services across our enterprise. But I think the point here is that you need at this level that deep understanding of the business and of the products that you're offering, and what needs a bit, you need the people who can dig in a little bit deeper. Our normal triage analyst is going to look at something for about 15 minutes and then escalate it and move on because of the volume.
Or close it.
Or close it, exactly. Our investigations analyst is going to spend another, and this is a very general ballpark kind of number I'm throwing out, but probably another 45 minutes to an hour before they move on as well. Now that can change from one organization to another depending on your structure and processes, but the point here is that they're going to dig in. They've got some subject matter expertise behind them. They know the data. They know the product or service, and hopefully they're going to be able to remediate it or find someone in that particular line of business who can help them remediate it.
Yeah, and the trigger here is really complexity, right? The likelihood that this is a multi-stage attack or potentially a human operator, where you need to have a more experienced senior analyst that has a broader set of experience, a deeper set of understanding, and a little bit more familiarity with the attackers, is really what you're looking for at the investigation level, because it's not just an exact template run-of-the-mill where you need a little human judgment. You actually need a degree of human skill at the investigation level, experience.
Absolutely. And then, if we do discover those, high stakes kind of bigger, major incidents, a threat actor in our environment or whatever, we're going to escalate that to what we're calling incident management, traditionally like a tier 3 kind of role, and where we have dedicated incident responders. We've got some reactive hunters in there, and I think importantly, especially for a big enterprise, we have those business coordinators who understand our enterprise infrastructure, and they can reach out and grab the people who are stakeholders in this incident, who are impacted, and get them onto what is essentially a task force dedicated to that particular incident. That's how we do that.
Yeah, and at Microsoft, just one thing to keep in mind is we actually have many different environments, and we work together as a fusion center, so we tend to be a little bit more complex. The minimum viable product, or the MVP of incident management, is that they coordinate with PR and communications and legal to make sure that there's a attorney-client privilege coverage for the incident. So they handle the business process elements of it, as opposed to like a traditional tier 3, which does hunting when they're not taking escalations, is much more of a technical escalation or a security escalation. Incident management is much more of that, hey, can you guys coordinate with all these, and this is the case number, and let me know if you have any questions, but I got to get back to the investigation. Exactly. So they're sort of that, take that process pain off of the analysts.
That's right. And we see that now on the other side of that tier 3, we have the hunt side, the more proactive side of things. We actually set aside those proactive hunters so that they're not getting dragged into these incidents. These are the ones who are handling the escalations that are not terribly complex or time sensitive as well. So yeah, I think dividing that tier 3 into those two for us has been a really good model. But even if you don't have the maturity or the people to be able to do that, understanding the different mentalities there is really important. And and pointing out the coordination across the enterprise is obviously the important thing, to include the threat intel piece, which kind of goes through the whole part of it.
Yeah, and there's great coordination between these, kind of going back to our original teamwork, where, hey, you don't have to necessarily escalate the case. Let me bring one of the hunt team over and have them take a look at it and see if it's something that needs to be escalated, or if it's just a routine thing, because that's a weird thing with that service. We've seen it before. Right. So that hunt piece, they have this sort of delicate balance. You want them to be there in case you need an escalation, but you also want to have a little bit of separation. You want to empower your investigation team to handle as much as possible of the reactive, so that you can do a proactive hunt. Because no matter how good your sensor network is and all your detections are, occasionally they slip through. It's sort of like, I'm a little bit older, so I think about in terms of the 1980s, you put out a whole bunch of sonar buoys, but eventually a submarine's going to kind of sneak through, and you've got to be able to proactively hunt for them, because you can't detect everything, especially against really intelligent, creative humans. And so the hunt teams kind of balance between those two.
Right. Yep. And then there's the threat intel piece as well, which is something we've already sort of talked about how it permeates from the SOC operations into the business, how we have that strategic and tactical side of it. You can see that represented here as well. And I think that in addition to the way we do it, we've got this internal threat intel team that's doing that, but we're also leveraging external intelligence sources as well. I mean, we have a third-party platform we're using as a tip, a threat intelligence platform. We're contributing into that and subscribing to the information that comes from it to provide IOCs and context around these events. So that threat intelligence piece is really important.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of call back to some of the stuff you were talking about on the previous slide, because a lot of security operations, to me, threat intelligence is lessons learned, right? Like making sure that you're not doing the same work over again. Mm-hmm. And so that becomes immediately apparent to most security operations or SOCs very quickly, that we need to be looking at indicators of compromise and file hashes and bad IP addresses and whatnot, and getting those external feeds, in whatever form fashion at that level. But the thing that a lot of organizations are still kind of figuring out is, hey, we need to make this strategic, because that should be affecting business decisions. It should be affecting your security architecture, because at the end of the day, when you think about it, if anything is weak in the rest of your security posture, it's going to generate more incidents, which generates more workload for the security operations. Yep. So in many cases, security operations is your best advocate for cleaning up security hygiene and the rest of it, because they pay the price for anything that nobody else is doing. So it's very important, not only to have that healthy culture within security operations, but to build those relationships between security operations and the rest of the organization, so that feedback can be seen as, oh yeah, that's the guy from the SOC. He's really good. He's not going to mess with me, right? Mm-hmm. Or she's not going to mess with me. She's going to give me good advice, and she's not going to bother me with the stuff that I don't need to deal with. And so it's really important to have those healthy relationships there.
It is. I think you're right. And I think that threat intel team is actually, or person, someone who has the ability to basically translate that security talk and all those details, synthesize them, and really put up in front of decision makers kind of the concise, no nonsense, summary of what's important. I think that's a really important piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, to security leaders, to security architects, managers, but also to business leaders, so you can explain it in plain English terms. That's right. Spanish or Brazilian Portuguese or whatever.
That's right. Yeah.
And so the last thing I just want to highlight there on the right is that partner teams thing, because again, this is not the security operations does not mean you operate the environment. It means you operate over it and deal with the incidents coming into it. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important to recognize that you've got to build those relationships with those other teams, including the DevOps teams, who often aren't thinking necessarily really deeply about security, but you've got to have that ability to reach them if there's an incident or if they're attacked and you detect something on it, and also partner with them to make sure that the detections are in there in the first place. And of course, HR for insider risks that, oh, wait, that's not an attacker. That's the actual person doing the bad stuff, right? Like we need to talk to HR, right? Yes. And so, through that incident management process, oftentimes you end up having to have all these relationships, and yeah, we're going to need legal on this one.
It's true. It's true. It's true. And you get that question. I get a lot from our customers who visit us in the CDOC trying to get their head around all the different teams that are present. And some of them, are not what you'd initially think of as a security team, but it is important to have that subject matter expert in the room, or at least able to reach out and grab them if you need them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So John, any final thoughts before we close out on security operations?
No, I think I'm really glad that we've covered this. I think it's really important in the context of what the overall thing that you've been talking about here, and I appreciate the opportunity to share some of this information.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Really appreciate your help, and hopefully this was important to y'all. So thank you for watching and listening, and hopefully this helps you with your security operations. Thank you.
Thank you.